Então, para não atrasarmos muito o arranque da sessão, enquanto as últimas pessoas entram na sala, vou fazer uma brevíssima apresentação do Maarten Gielen, dos Rotor, que vem da Bélgica, onde trabalha desde 2005 numa cooperativa, literalmente, e estão organizados como uma cooperativa de profissionais, e estava hoje a comentar comigo que já são mais não arquitetos do que arquitetos a trabalhar nesta cooperativa, que se chama Rotor, e que se destacaram particularmente na Bienal de Veneza de 2012, se eu não estou a baralhar as datas todas, com uma exposição no pavilhão belga sobre materiais e sobre a materialidade da arquitetura, que deu exposição essa que deu origem a vários outros convites e a várias participações noutros contextos, nomeadamente uma exposição sobre o ateliê do arquiteto Rem Koolhaas, Suzoma, que teve lugar no Barbican, e em 2013, como comissários da Trienal de Arquitetura de Oslo, com uma exposição sobre sustentabilidade, Beyond the Green Door. Os Rotor têm uma prática de arquitetura que poderíamos chamar uma prática não ortodoxa, e dentro das várias vertentes do escritório, o Maarten tem desenvolvido e trabalhado mais no campo da reutilização e reconversão de edifícios, e é isso que ele nos vai trazer aqui hoje, o trabalho da Rotor Deconstruction, que ele coordena dentro dessa cooperativa maior que são os Rotor. Não me vou alongar mais nas apresentações, o currículo está impresso nesta folhinha verde que vocês têm, e sem mais delongas ia convidar o Maarten. Maarten, thank you so much for joining us today, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Maybe if the audience is willing to sacrifice a bit of the depth of the color and the presentation, we can keep the curtain open or half open. I think it's a very good idea. Yeah, thank you. So I'm here today to talk to you about Rotor Deconstruction, which is a project we have been doing for the last 2.5, 3 years. But before going into that, I will make a bit of a side step and give a bit of the context and the reasons why we started doing this project. And there's two notions that there's two different terms that I want to talk about. First is this notion of sustainable, which is always used as an adjective, and very problematic in many ways, and then architecture and the state of the field today. So let's start with sustainability, which by now there is a kind of a generation of kids for whom the world's sustainability and sorting your stuff in different bags of different colors, which is a kind of a new natural state, right? It's not questioned anymore. However, it's important to remind ourselves that this notion of sustainability is actually a very, very young idea. It can be traced back to a very specific instance, the Brundtland Commission, which was a UN commission in the beginning of the 80s, who actually invented this notion. So the Brundtland Commission, I mean, most of you are probably familiar with this because it's in all the handbooks and it's always coming back. And what I want to do is maybe make you understand how weird this moment in history actually was. Because the Brundtland Commission was a group of people brought together by the highest form of government that we have, the United Nations, and they received this brief, a bit of like a design brief. They were tasked with formulating an aspirational goal for the world community, which is kind of like, tell us a future, what is driving mankind as a whole, beyond race, beyond geography, beyond technology, and so on. What should we as humanity aspire to? Which is a crazy brief. If you, it's almost as if this comes straight out of a science fiction novel by Asimov or one of the other 60s. And so, in response to this, what is this aspirational goal? Well, the Brundtland Commission says what we should aspire to is sustainable development. And this is really the first time that this notion is formally being defined. There were some activist groups that were putting forward these ideas. And they define it in this way. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Again, a sentence that most of us have seen over and over and over and again. So I want to just point out two very weird things in this definition. The first is this idea of needs. All right, sustainable development depends very heavily on that. If there is no need, there cannot be something cannot be sustainable. So, for instance, here we have a sign outside of a chocolate factory bloating how much CO2 has been saved by putting solar panels on top of the roof. Well, if you think chocolate is a human need, there can be such a thing as sustainable chocolate. If you do not agree that chocolate is a human need, there is no sustainable chocolate. That's basically the premise. And so we can do the same exercise for airports. If you think individual mobility is an absolute necessity for humankind, then we can start thinking about how to make it more sustainable or sustainable. If you don't agree with that, there is no such thing as a sustainable airport. So it makes this whole notion very subjective, very debatable, very political in a way. The second point that is strange in this definition is this notion of future generations. So that would mean that even if we would manage a process where we ask the opinion of everybody that is living today, and we would have a vote, and everybody would agree that a certain course of action is necessary, even then, we cannot be sure that we can make a legitimate decision, because there is a future generation. We don't know who they are. We don't know how many there will be. We don't know what they will aspire to. We don't know what they want. They cannot talk. They cannot be argued with. And they also need to be taken into account. And so from there on, sustainability became this tool, a very emancipatory tool, because if we need to take into account people that do not have a voice, we can use it also to talk about people that live already today but do not have a voice in a political process. Or we can all of a sudden talk in the name of turtles that do not have a voting right, but have a kind of a stake in a certain debate. So you have this first step, a kind of a brief to give us a goal in life. Second step, a definition that makes the problem almost worse, because everything is being opened up. Everything all of a sudden is up for debate. And so here we are in the beginning of the 80s, and then over the decades up until now, what we have seen is a process of trying to narrow this idea down. In a way, if you ask an architect, build me a sustainable facade or a sustainable building, maybe not every architect needs to go through the torture of thinking, what is this future generations, what are our needs, and so on. So there has been a process going on in society where it is being tried to come to a kind of a consensus about what sustainability is. And so architecture, this is, by the way, the Rio Convention in '92 that came up with these famous 3 circles. economic, ecological, and social sustainability. And from there on, there's been lots of debates, lots of ways of trying to make this notion more concrete. And architecture has very much been at the forefront of this discussion, and architecture opinions have been kind of fueling this debate. So some architects say, well, in the name of sustainability, we should demolish all the infrastructure that we have and start over. Others say, like, no, in the name of sustainability, we should never demolish again. And so we are now well, 30, 35 years later after the definition, and what we can see is that sustainability has kind of landed on a very weak but very real consensus. And the Dutch Post is always very good at summarizing things. This is sustainability, what it is today. It's something about wind energy and compensating your flights with planting trees. And if you're an architect, it's insulation. No question about it, it's insulation. So to go further, we see now that this term is very much mainstream, very much defined, that cities want to be the most sustainable, companies want to be the most sustainable, visions are being drafted, politics are being adapted in the name of this sustainability. So we did an exercise with a friend of ours, Robert Surmont, in the small city of Leuven that wants to be carbon neutral in the next decade, and we kind of started documenting everything that takes place in that city in the name of sustainability. So, for instance, this is a scene of an open house, a house that was renovated to be a passive house standard, and the woman in the back that has the projector screen half on her is kind of making a testimony of the hardship it was to live in the house while it was being insulated, and the visitors in the front, they kind of wear these blue plastic shoe covers to not to damage the architecture that they are visiting. So from an ethnographic point of view, all kinds of strange things are starting to happen. A brainstorm room at a consultancy company that wants to be #1 in sustainability, the meat counter of a biological supermarket in a posh neighborhood in Leuven, the meeting room of a company, a spin-off of the Leuven University that then afterwards went bankrupt because the innovations that they partially developed were produced at a much larger scale in China, and so on. So we made these pictures and we exhibited them in the city of Leuven again as a kind of a portrait, you know. When you go to the museum and you look at figurative painting, you create a sort of a distance. A famous boat that sunk or whatever. We wanted to create this same sort of distance. Now, in architecture, now that this consensus exists, we're seeing really a sort of a prototypical attitude and project that is taking over. And there could have been many projects that we could have taken as an exemplary, but we took Masdar City by Foster and partners. So Masdar City, the title says it all, a sustainable city in the desert. So the idea to create a new high-tech, carbon-neutral city in Abu Dhabi, top architects, lots of money, research and development, using technologies or planning for technologies that don't exist yet, and so on. So a very interesting project in many ways. For instance, they use vertical towers to use the wind to blow in colder air in the city. So there's a kind of a refrigeration system at the scale of a city, which is quite interesting. The car is banned from the city. Everything happens with these small electrical vehicles on a subterranean level. And very speakingly, there is this wall. So because of the different systems, including the idea of cooling down the whole city with this air, there was a need for a barrier around the city to be able to manage this air quality. Now, what is interesting about this very wall is that this wall is also the object that separates the sustainable from the unsustainable. So when Foster or the commissioner, Masdar City, says that they want to create a sustainable city, they are talking about everything that takes place within the boundaries of the wall. So the airport is not within the boundaries of the wall, so it's not in the carbon data. The cement factory is not in the city, and so is also not in it. So we have this architectural object, a wall, that literally, if you would puncture it, you go from an area that is considered sustainable into an area that is considered not to be sustainable, namely the rest of the world. And so, of course, if you look at Masdar City, by the way, it's always being postponed when this development is going to happen, because then, of course, we had the 2008 crisis that reduced many ambitions in the Middle East. When we take this claim of a sustainable city in the middle of the desert, and we start zooming out, we actually realize that Masdar City is not a city in the middle of the desert. It is a suburban development at the outskirts of Abu Dhabi. And if you zoom out even more, you realize that there is no way to understand Masdar City otherwise than being part of a very oil-rich region and a kind of a theme park development of that region. And so it is. Whereas from an architectural point of view, it is understandable that the architect can only make claims on the plot of land that is being assigned to him. From a political or a more broader perspective, you cannot advocate a sustainable object in a kind of an ocean of unsustainability. However, if you take this logic serious, what it would boil down to is that we have this world that as a whole is unsustainable. We create a pocket inside that world that would become the first sustainable place. There would be more and more of these pockets. These pockets would grow together, and eventually the whole world would become sustainable. That's kind of the way LEED, BREEAM, most architecture projects, that's the logic that they are following. Now the question is, are we, when we are working project by project, are we just outsourcing the harmful effects of our action to areas that we are less concerned with, or are we actually solving something? And I think any architect that builds sustainably is going to be confronted with this notion at one point. And I would go a step further, because I introduced this problem through the bias of sustainability, which has this almost one-to-one overlap. In order to measure something, you need to define what you're talking about. Well, architects typically work on plots. And if the plot is a city, well, then it's just a big plot. Or sometimes a plot can also be a period of time. I'm talking about a conceptual plot, of course. There is projects that architects do that are not geographically bound. However, there is always this notion of a project that has a beginning and an end, a very specific brief for architects to work with. And so when you look at most firms, their portfolio, what you get is a kind of a collection of plots, of projects that have, at best, some sort of stylistic or thematic approach that joins them together, but that are in an area all over the world. Here you see the portfolio of Big, and the firm even makes a kind of a little emblem for every object that they produce. And so what we see is a kind of a retraction of architecture from public discourse. We are engaging more and more kind of at the project level. And so quite naturally what this does is that it pushes the focus of the architectural offices into those projects where something exceptional might happen, right? A basic office tower, maybe you don't even need an architect anymore. You can just copy-paste the one that is next door. However, a museum, in this case a competition for the Guggenheim, has this kind of promise that maybe on that specific plot we might do something that is a little bit out of the ordinary, and so bam, you have 1,750 architects that submit a project there, and they're all competing together. Another problem with architecture is that you're kind of managing a process of which you are really not holding on which you are really not holding much leverage. Economic situations might change, taste might change, your relationship with the client might change. And so this project, Masdar City, is a really nice example about how even, I mean, we're talking about a city of 6 square kilometers and an effort, okay, it would have been a project for 20 years, but 20 years, if you compare that to the building site of a cathedral, 20 years is nothing. And even 20 years, we do not manage to plan on a timescale of 20 years anymore. On top of that, and are there many architects in the room? Who's an architect in here? Well, I would say that most of you will recognize, or it would be interesting to hear your feedback on this. Well, architecture from a human point of view, as a practice, is not a very nice job to do. It has a lot of uncertainties. It has a tremendous pressure, tremendous stress. You have impossible deadlines, impossible responsibilities. You have no control on kind of the relationship with your output and your economic input. It's very, very difficult to understand what the links are between these, especially if you want to produce qualitative architecture, whatever that means. If you try to take a stand, architecture is really not a very nice environment to work in. I think there is not one big architecture office that does not depend on a lot of free labor that comes into account. Underpaid interns is just one example. And so we're in this, even though architecture has a, I'm sorry if you if you find it shocking, it's all up for debate later on. So architecture, whereas there is this idea of a social commitment and an effort to make the world a better place, and it's such an important thing and so on, if you look at what goes on within the architectural practice, it's very difficult to match this. Basically, we're in this sort of ultra-modernism where even the basic social security has been filtered out. So that's the context that we operate in, and that's kind of the starting point. Again, it's formulated probably a bit harsher than there's room for much more nuance in this starting point, but I would say we started out 10 years ago wanting to work in a meaningful way with a group of friends in the beginning, and the combination of not being able to manage the political agenda of our project and not being able to manage how the work was going to be organized because you never set your own deadlines and so on, made us look at maybe other ways of being active in this architectural field. And so we started with design kind of temporary pavilions and infrastructure for culture, and then we recently delivered a building that is a few thousand square meters big, so kind of small to medium-sized projects. Then we almost immediately started combining this with research projects, which is kind of a cliche because most architecture offices will do that. One example that we're very proud of is we made a metabolistic analysis of what goes on in the construction industry in the Brussels region, so measuring every input and every output in terms of material into that system and trying to start drawing conclusions from that. We publish a lot, and we try to make a big exhibition every 2 to 3 years, and this is really considered not on top of our practice but part of our practice. And then 3 years ago, roughly, we started a separate company, which is called Rotor Deconstruction, which is concerned with how to manage the end of life of buildings. So a very eclectic way of working. What binds this all together is an interest in the material economy. So how should that be understood? We think that the way materials circulate in society can be read as a book and can be used as a way to comment on that society. A bit like if you would be a team of archaeologists and you find Egyptian coins in a Celtic village the other side of the Mediterranean, you can use this to prove that there was a link between these two cultures, and you can start kind of speculating about what this means and maybe draw some conclusions. Well, today there's a lot of materials that are in circulation. We consume a lot of materials, and by looking at these materials, we can, our claim is we can start drawing some conclusions about our society. So what you're looking at is a blue-veined cow, a breed of cow that is being cultivated for its meat production. So it was naturally selected over 20, 30 generations. Always the cow with the most muscles was being selected to make the next breed. And so by now these cows are so big that they cannot give birth in a natural way anymore. So every birth happens through a cesarean cut. And so what that means is that when you take the ladder of that cow, you can see 3, 4, sometimes 5 or 6 cesarean cuts that have been needled and shut again. So you would think that maybe then the leather would get burned or wouldn't be used. Actually, this leather is used just like any other leather. It goes to tanneries and so on, except it's used for the parts of your shoes that are invisible, or for making gloves, or it's printed over with a kind of a fake leather pattern. But we think this kind of material, like imagine a Prada handbag with 5 cesarean cuts on it. Well, the bag is actually too small because these cuts are quite big. That this is an interesting comment on society, and that this is an interesting material to consider. Now, within the context of architecture, the challenge is that most architects deal with lines and specifications, and not that much with materials. The end product of what an architecture does is a kind of a book of specifications that goes to the contractor, and it's the contractor's job to translate the drawings into materials. So architects don't typically have much space to kind of experiment with other types of materials. One example, a statue of a priest in Aalst. His name is Daans, and he was a forefighter for kind of social emancipation. Aalst was a textile city. You had a lot of exploitation of, basically, it was a kind of the Bangladesh of the early 19th century in Belgium. So kids and very young people that were being exploited, who worked super long hours in very dangerous situations. And so this priest started his own political party, started a co-op, started selling bread, started a newsprint, and started unchaining this proletariat from the industry that was keeping them in chains. So the statue is standing on top of a block of blue limestone, and this blue limestone is a material that is being quarried just 50 kilometers down south, and is a material that is omnipresent in the Belgian-built environment. Now, the statue, besides the block that it's standing on, also stands on a square that is paved seemingly in the same material, but on closer inspections, does not have the typical veins of the Belgian blue limestone. And so what happened here is that the architects specified a blue limestone, probably thinking to use a material that attaches to local traditions and so on, but that the contractor used a blue limestone that was quarried probably in Vietnam, maybe in China, without proper control on the working environments, with quite probably child labor being involved, and so on. So when you look again at this statue, which is supposedly a kind of a celebration of the emancipation of the worker, and you are realizing that he is standing on an ocean of blue limestone that is quarried in very doubtful circumstances, this becomes a very, very cynical image. This certainly is not the image that the city council was. I mean, this could be a very, very cynical contemporary work of art, right? We were asked to make a proposal for an art intervention in the street, and we proposed to move the statue to the place where the stones were quarried. Of course, the city didn't accept, but just to give you an idea of how strong this image actually is. This is not a celebration of the emancipation of the worker anymore. It's a celebration of the outsourcing of the worker to another geographic area. And so we think that we need to develop tools within architecture to better control, better being able to use the language, the connotations that these materials imply. So that's where the rotor deconstruction comes into being, because we are situated in Brussels. About 1 million people live there. Brussels is also quite an interesting place because it very literally has no wall around it. It's very difficult to define where Brussels stops and something else begins. But let's say roughly 1 million people, and there is no forest, there is no sand quarries, there is no blue limestone quarries, there is absolutely no extraction or production of building materials ever. So it's a city without any resources if you look at the built environment. In fact, if you look at the metabolism of Brussels, we output about 650,000 tons of building waste a year, and we import about 750,000 tons of building materials. So almost 1-to-1 for every truck of waste coming out. There's another truck coming in. So Brussels can be understood as a sort of a cloaca machine that takes in building materials and outputs rubble at best. So is there a way to consider these 650,000 tons of materials that we output as a sort of a distributed quarry, as a place where we could extract usable materials from? I will make a small detour and talk about a project we did in Geneva with some students very briefly. They got an assignment, very open. They decided to demount a jewelry shop that was about to be demolished, got the whole interior cladding out of it, started doing experiments with that in the school, documenting all the materials and placing these materials in different environments, like the gold color ceiling in a tunnel underneath, like a tunnel that was used by a lot of skaters and youngsters in the neighborhood and so on. So after a semester of experiments, because they always took down the installations again, they had this classroom full of stuff. And the principal told them, like, if you leave it the first day of the holiday, I'm going to call somebody and it will all be gone in September. And so gradually they started saying, well, our thesis project is going to be how to manage the end of life of these materials. Are we going to burn them, or are we going? So in the end, what they found out is that the city of Geneva had this service that you could call, and it's a free pickup for building waste. So you call them, they give you a date, and you have a 24-hour time period in which you can put the materials on the boardwalk, and then they send a service to pick them up. Very handy service. And so they called the service, put the materials outside on the other side of the school, and waited for 24 hours. Except what they did is they organized the materials precise, they cleaned them, they made sure that everything was complete, and they arranged them in quite a simple but quite a nice display. And so they retracted in the school to watch what would happen, and of course, not half an hour later, people started picking up these materials. In the middle of the night, almost everything was gone, and just the very, very few heavy pieces that were left were picked up by the municipality in the morning. So by a simple transformation of the organization of the materials, you can actually go from a waste product to a salvageable material. If those same materials would have been in a waste bin straight away, quite probably nobody would have trusted them enough to pick them out and start using them again. And it's, I want to insist, it's kind of like a real life test. It's not students that pick this up to make a pavilion or a cocktail bar or whatever. These are just random strangers that were picking up this stuff. So when we look at these 650,000 tons of materials in Brussels, it's important to understand what are they then? Are they all rubble? Are they wood? Are they ceilings? And so on. So we started by doing that, and we realized that one of an important stream of materials was materials coming from office spaces, because the habit in Brussels is that at the end of every lease, the building is completely cleared. So you go back to the raw concrete structure at the end of every lease. And so you see here a diagram of one of our suppliers where you see that, well, half of the offices roughly has a life expectancy of less than 8 years, say. So that generates a very big stream of materials that are pretty good quality. Like here you see the headquarters of General Electric in Brussels that lasted maybe 10 to 12 years. This building looks better and newer than most places I've ever lived in, that's for sure. And is finished to a much higher standard than what most of us are used to. Also interesting is that most of these materials are super easy to demount because of flexible floor planning. They all are system-based, can easily be unscrewed, not too much glue, and often they come in big series. You won't have like a door and then another door and another door. You have a language, a system of components that is spread out through the whole building. So it's quite easy to pick up these materials, put them in a truck and bring them to their new venue. Or so it would seem. Because what you're looking at here is a complete building in parts. You have the structure at the bottom, you have the cladding, you have the bolts, the connectors, and everything else. Now, as an architect, imagine that you want to use this quite large building in a project of yours. How do you go about this? Do you buy first the building in parts and then ask for the building permit? Or do you ask for the building permit first and then hope that the building will in parts will still be there? That's a big challenge because there's 6 to 8 months in between those two decisions. What if you tell your contractor, I assure you this building is complete, and turns out there is a few missing pieces? Who's going to take responsibility? Is your liability of your contractor going to be okay? Can you get it in another color? Can you get it a bit higher? Can you get it a bit larger? And so on. All the flexibility that you have with new materials and all the easiness that you have with new materials, you lose the moment that you start wanting to use these materials. Now, if you want to build a shed for storing a boat in someone's garden and municipality is not going to ask for a permit, go ahead. But if you are in a professional environment with risk minimization and so on, this is not going to happen. So what we said is there is a need for a sort of an ecosystem. There's all kinds of things that are missing for it to be able to work. First of all, you need a material trader. You need somebody that gives you the same service that you expect from a new material when you buy a second-hand material. It can be delivered the day you want it. It can be made sure that everything is there. If you want it a bit taller and it's technically possible, maybe the trader should be able to do that and so on. The good thing is, when we started researching, we found 100 companies in the Belgian territory that are actually already doing that. Like cobblestones, for instance, is a material that is being reused and reused all over again. Some of those that are in Belgian roads are 150, 200 years old. Funnily enough, they were quite probably also made with child labor, but child labor that's kind of been absorbed about with 150 years of pay down, let's say. You have companies that demount industrial steel buildings or for parts or for moving them entirely, that can weld new structures out of reclaimed steel. You have a very good industry cleaning bricks. So going from a heterogeneous source of materials, sorting them, cleaning them, and in the end you get these pallets of nicely stacked bricks. You know exactly how many are on a pallet, you get a technical description and so on. Standardized specifications are another problem. I was telling you, architects do not work with materials. They do not have a warehouse full of stones that they assign to a specific process. So they need a way to describe the materials that they work with. So what we did is we brought together the most important dealers of second-hand materials, and we started asking them, what is the criteria for a brick? How can you tell a quality reclaimed brick from a non-quality one? Well, you don't want bricks coming from chimneys, you don't want bricks that have been used for foundations because they have been in contact with groundwater and so on. And so we wrote these technical specifications that architects can freely copy-paste from our website, and these things are starting to be used. These technical descriptions also have a kind of a long life expectancy, and they influence architecture in a very, very slow but long way. For instance, in the standard technical descriptions that you can download from most websites of Belgian blue limestone quarries, it is specified that all the boardwalk stones, so the stone that is the edge of the boardwalk, that they all should be the same length within a given project, which makes sense if you're trying to sell stones. You make sure that they use as much new stones as possible, so you exclude anything that is different from the standard. However, what we see today is that we have these perfectly usable boardwalk stones, and we're replacing them with new stones that are being imported from far away. Now, I don't have a problem. I'm not a kind of anti-globalist, and I don't think that every region should be self-sustainable. But what we have is we have a region where in certain neighborhoods we have up to 25–30% of youth unemployment. And we are sending away perfectly usable stones that need just a little bit of work because of some kind of 1950s, 1960s building specification code that absolutely does not make sense. There is no technical reason to specify that all these stones should be the same length. And so this is a project that is ongoing. Now, the legal framework is another issue. It's mostly European legislation. It's very difficult to understand, but there's two types of reuse. Reuse that is a waste management strategy, reuse that is a product management strategy. One is under the product codes, the other one is under the waste. Basically, if I have this bottle of water and I don't want it anymore, it becomes a waste product. And then I throw it in the bin, and to be able to pick it out of the bin, you need to be a certified waste handler. Now, if I have this bottle of water and I don't want it anymore, and I give it to you, then it has never been a waste product. I took the decision to give it to you knowing that it was going to be reused. And so, of course, for a bottle of water, that is easy, but if you're talking about car batteries that are being exported to Congo, is it a waste product or not, becomes a very edgy question. And so we need to follow up on what that means. Another example, when in the 19th century, the old fortifications of Antwerp were being demolished, they were sold for demolition. And so these processes still exist. You can, within code, within standard practice, you can sell a building for demolition or parts of a building for demolition. However, government workers don't necessarily know the whole code. They work with kind of simplifications and forms that have been made for them by legal departments. And so again, there, what we did is we made this little booklet. At the end, you have these yellow forms, and you can specify your demolition process in a different way. So all of a sudden, materials that were not coming on the second-hand market anymore, all of a sudden they can do that. And then there is the policy level. We see that there is a very strong lobby from the material producing industry to influence policy, and we send out registered mail to the same administrations, giving our remarks, telling them in what way this is going to be beneficial or not to the industry. And so we get texts that we write, little blobs of text that get copy-pasted into policy documents. And so all of a sudden, this ecosystem is starting to work because we have suppliers, we have potential clients because the code exists. We have a government that, instead of forbidding reuse of materials, all of a sudden writes in its own specifications that they see this as a positive and to be encouraged step. And so that is where we are more or less today. Now, of course, I was telling you about 100 dealers that exist in Belgium. There is some nuance that is necessary because a lot of these companies are kind of into building antiques. So it's forged iron staircases or bricks from the period of the Spanish Inquisition and so on and so on. And this totally doesn't match with the sort of buildings that are being demolished today. So we need new ways of accessing, marketing, selling these materials. Large-scale projects, like a 30,000 square meter office building that is being demolished, cannot be managed in the same way as a small farmhouse that is being demolished. So we make inventories, and one of the commercial strategies that we have is that we try to sell off as much components as we can while the building is still there. So the building, for the time period that they ask for a demolition permit, actually becomes sort of our warehouse. And we're going to pick the things out of it that we can find immediate markets for. Of course, this raises economic questions, right? You need to run a profit on it. So some materials are cheap, too cheap for us to be able to manage them. But all in all, we are starting to see that materials can be moved. And I think an important notion in this whole debate is to understand that building materials, just like clothes, are not only a technical requirement, they are also a cultural product, right? When you go to an H&M store, you're not going there with a technical specifications say like it should be breathable to so much percent, and it should be insulating to that coefficient, and it should be washable 500 times and so on. You kind of buy the clothes that you like, and building materials are, by architects, mostly consumed in the same way. It's about tastes in a way. And so it is a cultural product that needs a cultural way of selling also. I'm going to skip the example of the book tower. Maybe just one of our biggest projects we did now until now, and it's already 2.5 years ago that we did it, was a big iconic bank building from the 70s. Lots of wonderful materials. If you would get the amount of wenge that was in this building, if you today would get that out of Congo, it would be considered an act of war. It was totally obscene. But when you work at this scale of buildings, you all of a sudden you're confronted with all sorts of things that actually are very close to the architectural profession. We had a book with a few hundred different types of applications of asbestos in that building. So that doesn't mean a few hundred places where there is asbestos, a few hundred types of products that contain asbestos that have been used in a single building. And even the book was not complete. Our staff needs to be trained to recognize and have certain procedures in place when they bump into asbestos. We need to, if you remove 60 or 80 tons of granite on the 7th floor, on the 9th floor of an office building, you cannot put all of them in one place. You need to manage how you're moving the weight through the building, just in terms of stability. So again, it's a very good thing that we have architects in our team to start managing them. Actually, in the same way that it takes an architect to put the building up, it takes an architect to take one down. We had a subway tube going through the building on -4 while the building goes on to -6. So there's all sorts of like security meetings and so on. We do have a shop now. We have a storage, we have a shop, and we realized that actually products, every single product needs a kind of a specific service, and what we are doing is basically industrial design. If you are removing large quantities of parquet flooring, most of the parquet flooring before the Second World War has been sanded after being placed. So that means that the middle part is usually thinner than the outer part. So you can either number all of them or find a way to standardize all of them. So we are kind of doing industrial design, we're doing packaging design and logistics and so on. A very simple example, a building, you have I don't know, 6,000 to 10,000 little door knobs in them that are here. How do you market that? Well, the same as with new products. This was our prototype, and this is what is in store right now in certain stores. This is a beta project, and there's some issues with it agreed on it. But in principle, it makes the point that it should be as easy to buy a second-hand door handle as it is to buy a new one. You should be able to buy it in the same shop at the same price, if not cheaper. So we are moving away from this idea of doing projects where we have a very specific brief, and we are kind of trying to develop an overarching project in a singular, some kind of vision, something that we are trying to realize on a macro, on a city scale, but that is not bound by a timing or by any other constraints. And so the last example, and that will take me only a few minutes, is a project that has nothing to do with us, and yet we made it possible. A building from the 70s, early 70s, quite interestingly, this facade and this one are built by the same architect at the exact same time. So it's kind of a weird building. It's this cluster of triangles and how do you call the ones that have 6 corners and hexagons clustered together in a very, very interesting design. It's not a listed building. The interiors are not listed. The architect isn't even that famous. What is funny about it is that these hexagons motif is being carried out all through the building in all kinds of different ways. So it's peculiar enough to kind of notice, that's for sure. And in a way, it's also quite nice. The grade of finishings is very good. It was a former bank building that is now going to be a police headquarters. And so what we are seeing there, we had one meeting with this architecture office, R2D2, at the start of their project, where we gave them the vademecum with the yellow forms, explaining them that they can actually tender a demolition process in the same way as they would tender a building process, not just on price, but with some extra requirements. And so what we see is that they decided to keep in place part of the materials, demount certain materials. They saw that some of the materials that we were selling on our website were actually in their building. And so they quite logically said, well, if they can manage it economically to demount them, condition them, and make a profit selling them, then we can use them on site as well. And in the third step, they commissioned, they obliged the demolition contractor to look for alternatives for some of the materials. So the waste contractor got an extra time period, because time is really a crucial thing in the demolition trade, but had to prove that he contacted several firms to check if they would be interested in some of the materials that they were going to be demolished. And in this case, well, we were interested in part of the materials. Other pieces of the building might go to another one. And so you have a very simple process in a way where an architect all of a sudden has much more control of the materials that he's using in the building, and how the materials that he's not using are going to be managed. So we will have in our shop, starting in 2 weeks, some of these wonderful hexagonal claddings, and you're most welcome to use them in your projects. I mean, I'm kind of making a joke out of it, but the idea of running what is essentially a research or an activist project, running it as a business, forces you into other types of languages and makes some things you're doing quite suspicious, because we are advocating that the architects should tender in a certain way, and then 2 years later, all of a sudden, we get part of the materials out of that project. So, but this is how the building material industry in general is working, and I think that there is a kind of a space for entrepreneurship in that way. So I would say what we have right now is more or less what you see on this picture, a sort of a prototype that allows us to make all sorts of tests and minor adaptations. We don't have a full-scale model yet, just something we can test in a wind tunnel, as long as we keep it kind of on stilts. And we hope that from this point of view, in a few years, we will have like a real ecosystem dealing with these materials in Brussels. Thank you very much.
We still have time for a few questions.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's have a seat there, please. Já está. Obrigado. Thank you, Maarten, for this very nice presentation of your work. And before asking the audience if they have questions to raise and to ask, and please do ask in Portuguese, and I will try to translate into a similar question, if that's the case. But I actually would like to ask you to stress. You were saying that during the lecture, but how did it come a critical vision of what architecture is nowadays? How it has become a way of life, in a sense that in the end you are saying that it seems that we are activists, but afterwards we are businessmen. So how do you manage to balance that thing? I would try to answer for you, saying that it's a critical vision. Let's say it's an architectural reasoning that leads you towards that. Let's say balance. Making of architectural knowledge a tool to engage both in the activism and in the building practice. But how it operates in terms of real life. What were the challenges? What were the defining moments that made you shifting, or going into that direction? What would have been these defining moments? That would be my question.
Okay, I think that when you are, first of all, I want to stress that we have never wanted to be a school of any kind, or we are not saying to everybody that this is some sort of formula that I think there is a place for, let's say, a prototypical architecture office, and there is a few in Belgium and in Portugal that do very admiringly work within the very difficult circumstances that they have to operate. So it's just that for us, every project that we did kind of raised a few questions that made us go further. Like you do a very naive project for a private client doing a kitchen using reused boards, and you realize that actually you spend so much time on finding these boards that the whole project was totally economically unviable. And then a few of my partners and myself, then we got kids, and maybe you don't want to spend Saturday afternoon dumpster diving anymore. And so at one moment you just say like, okay, do we stop doing it? Do we just say like, we tried it, doesn't work, we adapt? Or do we say like, no, this is where it gets interesting, because this is actually why other people are not doing it. This is exactly, if we solve this problem for us, we solve it for many people. And I think our attitude has always been to consider these moments of stress to take them serious, and to maybe separate them, put them on a slower track, like try to find somebody that commissions an article about them, because that gives you a deadline or an obligation to think about it. Try to find somebody that commissions an exhibition about them, because then you need to think not only what I think about it, but how can I communicate it to another audience. And so kind of trying to pick the projects and the means to go a bit further.
Thank you. And actually I had another question, and you mentioned once or twice subcontracting, and it's this ecosystem of the building industry that you were speaking about. And there is also this idea of the big firms that operate within a certain kind of, let's say, large-scale strategy, and smaller firms that kind of slightly improvise and operate within different contexts. So how do these two things clash or don't clash within this practice of dismantling buildings?
I think the informal scale is very important and very easy to crush. I will give an example that is not in the building industry, but we were asked by the Brussels Opera to come up with strategies for reusing materials internally. And so they produce 3 or 4 set designs with quite large quantities of materials per year, and these go in the trash bin after each production. And so we were asked, can you come up with something else? And so when we took a closer look, we noticed that actually a lot of the materials were not going into the trash, but were diverted from the trash by some of the technicians that were working there and that had friends in other theaters that don't mind using second-hand boards, or that I mean, not everything, of course, it can be optimized, but that there was a kind of a circuit going on, except that this information does not go up to the highest management, of course, because it might be doubtful, like, is he buying new wood because the old wood, he stole it, or not? So it's a very fragile, activity, but actually it's probably the most interesting one, because if you would have to set up a centralized system that registers what material is there at what moment and that has a broad network of who wants what kind of material, it's such a bureaucracy, it's such an entropy that you need to go through that is not going to happen, especially not in a large institution. And so this informal practice is the appropriate one, and then you need to legitimize it, I think. Then you need to find a language to say this is actually state-of-the-art way of functioning because it's bottom-up and so on and so on. So I think in the construction industry it's the same. We have one of our scouts, which is a guy living close to Ghent. He has a network of people that work on demolition sites, and during lunch hour they take door hinges off the door and like small details, maybe a light from time to time. Well, waste is a distributed resource. If I need to send one of our employees to go and pick up 2 doorknobs and a lamp, it's not going to happen. It cannot be done. If the demolition contractor needs to train his team to identify what is valuable and what is not, is also not going to happen. And so making sure that this informal practice can exist is very important to us. But then again, the bank building that I was showing, you know, we had a contract of 50 pages and asbestos inventory that was this thick, and your staff needs to be trained, and you need to scan your ID card before you can. I mean, it's a super formalized building demolition site, and informal practices are just not going to save a significant amount of those materials. So it's a balance, I think.
And stepping now to let's say, to architectural design and thinking of this informal nature of the things that you are picking and let's say the informality of the hexagons, how are you dealing with, let's say, more formal architectural practices that might recur to your services, not to dismantle their buildings, but to do their new designs?
So there is a sort of an entropy in scale. Like if you have a building and it has 500 fire doors that are all in the same dimensions, you cannot do another building that has 500 doors of them, because maybe one is scratched and so you don't have enough. However, you can probably do 10 or 20 buildings that need 20 doors because it's much easier to manage. The requirements are much lower. The formalities are much smaller for a smaller building site. And so our strategy is to source the materials in the biggest demolition sites possible and to sell them to small and medium-sized building sites.
Yeah, but do you have a close relationship with architectural offices that are designing new buildings, let's say, and go to have a look on your...
Yes. However, I must say that most of it at the moment is interior design, for the reason that everything that is on the outside of a building or that is structural, first of all, the structural material is too cheap. As compared to the risk that you take, structural material is very difficult to market at a competitive price. And second of all, the selling periods are much longer because they need to ask for a building permit. And so the situation that we have for the moment is that basically we focus on high valuable materials that have low risk. So a light, at worst, you need to rewire it. An alarm button that costs six euros, if it doesn't work the moment that you want it to work, that's like a very big risk for very, very little monetary value. And so these two factors plus the kind of the turnover, how long is the decision process for that typical material is influencing our business plan.
Okay. Thank you. I was wondering if someone in the audience has a question. I'm not allowed to pass you the microphone, but I know there is a microphone there that will go to you.
Thank you for your presentation. It's just a very pragmatic question regarding the data that accounts, for instance, the input of material and the output of waste of Brussels. What kind of databases do you use? How do you, or what kind of sources? Do you do it yourself, or?
So for the metabolic analysis, our assignment was to, so there is a compulsory notification duty for every waste handler and every large-scale demolition agent in Brussels. So they need to basically, at the end of every trimester, send how much waste they handled to the government. So in a way, you could say it's only adding up that data. Now, the problem is, of course, that it goes from one demolition contractor to a waste handler, to a sorting station, to and so the data is problematic because we don't know for sure how many times one thing has been counted. So at first there was this kind of, let's say that it's a combination of hard data with a sort of an economic analysis and sampling. We had 10 prototypical building and demolition sites to sample whether this corresponded, and we overlaid it with the number of building and demolition permits and so on. So it's kind of like a mixed source.
One more.
Well, hi. First of all, congratulations. I really love your line of investigation. It opens finally on the matter of materials, a vision of something that always existed. No, I felt a little bit shocked on one of your affirmation, and it's not about the utility of the architect. Over there, we could talk about it, but it's okay, it's cool. No, it's about a little. I know it was a kind of provocation, the banalization of the brown land, about the needs. You have to admit that when you put social equity on the balance, the needs are already balanced. It's not the need of chocolate that in this document and in the next, I don't feel that there is, well, there's a little void, but really the needs defined in the broadland are focused on the top 3 priorities. So I was afraid that your critics on the broadland could lead other person to do not think that it's a really important document on the side. And just to end it, this process is the work you're doing. It's very important to be spread. It ever happened to you to have worked with architects with your focus on materiality and materials, that at the end just focused on your branch of sustainability and not eventually on the all other parts of the holistic view?
Thank you. So just to be clear, I think the the Brundtland definition of sustainable development is quite brilliant, and maybe if I have one critique on it, it's this sort of Protestant kind of reluctance. It doesn't celebrate abundance. It doesn't invite for a kind of a very generous worldview. It's kind of containment of the projects and be very careful and move as little as possible so you make sure you don't break it. So my critique would be there, but I think the wording of the needs and how in Rio this has been defined in these three areas is good. However, I think we are far away from a sort of an existence minimum approach to sustainability. Today, I have a friend who was working on a bio-certification scheme for restaurants in the UK, and so very strict criteria: where does your meat come from, where does your milk come from, where do your potatoes come from, and so on. And they were shocked that the first applicant that they had was 165 McDonald's restaurants. Because following the strict criteria set out, they could just from one day to another order somewhere else. So we have today sustainable McDonald's, we have sustainable Coca-Cola, we have sustainable aluminum facades, we have sustainable everything. And what I wanted to stress is that within this notion of sustainable, there is the assertion whether or not you agree that this thing should exist in the first place. And that you can disqualify any claim of sustainability if you think the thing should not exist. And so that's a kind, it's not a critique, it's a powerful weapon in a way, a sort of a crowbar that the Brundtland definition has given us. And then in the second thing, I would say that the reason that so your question about a focus too much on materials maybe reduces, yeah, but does it has the possibility to reduce a sort of other aspects of the architectural project? And I think it has that potential, and that's also why we split up the two activities. We still have a design and research office, and we made Rotor Deconstruction into something else, because when my colleagues at Rotor Design, let's say, are working for a client, I want them to use the materials that they find appropriate, even if it's not the stuff in our warehouse, even if it's not reclaimed. They need to work for the clients, not for the materials. And so by I mean, there's other colleagues of ours in the Netherlands and in France that say that every architect should basically become a sort of a mini Rotor Deconstruction, sourcing your materials locally and so on. I don't think that. I think the architect needs to work for the client, and that if that means that a few thousand cubic meters of concrete need to be used, fine. But there should be a scale of possibilities, and that's the only. We're adding a possibility, I would say. The worst clients are actually those that are too motivated in the beginning, because I mean, the worst ones are if you have a client that is fragmented and you have one person within the client that is too motivated. That's actually the biggest problem, because then one very, very, very ambitious thing goes wrong and is used as an excuse to disqualify the whole process. So when we start working with a new client, we always kind of say like, okay, you know what? This time we use the partition walls. And if that goes well, next time you do the floors, the ceiling, and the partition walls. But like, take it easy. There's going to be a lot of demolition. There's going to be a lot of construction. You need to give us time to learn this process in a way.
Thank you. I don't know if there is one last question. Otherwise, we can risk to stay here until tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Please.
Just a very simple question. Loved your lecture. When you use a term like deconstruction, is it such a heavy word in the discipline? I would like you, if you have to comment about the use of this term.
It's of course a joke, in the sense that it refers to the deconstructivists, and the way we I mean, I think we're deconstructing two things. We're literally deconstructing buildings, but also what we are deconstructing is the system in which buildings are being created. Like the typical division between of responsibilities between the contractor, architect, commissioner, and so on, is actually something that is in the way of architectural quality in some cases. And so you could almost say that reclaiming or using reclaimed materials is an alibi for re-questioning a lot of things. Like we just won a competition for an industrial building commissioned by the Brussels region, where we proposed to not make a new building, but move an industrial building from somewhere else, except that we don't know how fast the process is going to be. So today on the market, we have that one, and that one, and tomorrow on the market might be 2 others. And so that means that, first of all, we don't have schematics. We cannot ask a building permit with drawings because we don't know the measures of the building that we're going to buy yet. So we made this kind of a building permit saying like, we're going to have a building that is between that much and that much wide and between that much and that much long. And because we have a reason to do that, because people understand why we are doing that, all of a sudden you are talking with somebody at the planning agency and saying like, well, this I can defend. It's perfectly okay, actually. There is no, your project is clear, you're staying within the plot lines and so on, and so you have this kind of a reason for having discussions about things that nobody thought could even be discussed anymore. And it's almost more important to have those discussions than to reuse 25 tons of steel for a steel structure.
Good. I think it's wonderful to finish this lecture with the idea that we can win a competition without the design, no? Just with the idea of the building. Well, I don't know if there is one last question. If not, thank you again, Maarten, for this wonderful lecture and this time here. And thank you all for coming. Muito obrigado. And see you next week on the opening of Fernando Guerra, Raio-X de uma Prática Fotográfica. Thank you.
Thank you.